Welcome back to the Scotti-BYTE channel, and this is Scott. So please subscribe and like to the channel and hit that notification bell and help me out with those YouTube algorithms. So today I wanted to talk about LXD VMs and the ability to mount drives inside of them. In my series on LXD Virtual Machines, we've learned a lot of interesting techniques so far. And if you're coming into this at this point, you might want to turn around and go back to the beginning where I start talking about not just LXD containers, but LXD virtual machines. So it's also possible to create additional disks, which are called storage volumes, that can be attached to a LXD virtual machine. LXD storage volumes can be formatted and mounted with standard Linux tools. We will learn how to work with LXD VM storage volumes in this video. This includes creating a disk, attaching a disk, formatting a disk, and mounting the disk in our Ubuntu LXD virtual machine. Here we are at the command prompt for my LXD test host, and we're going to do a LXD list first of all, and we see the 3 LXD virtual machines that we created in previous videos. The first was the test VM that we worked with in the last video, the Ubuntu VM that we worked in the previous video, and then the Windows 11 LXD virtual machine. So presently we have no ordinary LXD containers here. Before we can attach new storage to a LXD virtual machine, it needs to be stopped. And the machine we will use will be test VM, and you notice that it is in the stopped state. So the first step is we want to do a LXD storage volume create, and this will be in the default project or default storage pool. My disk size equals 10 gigabytes, and the type will be a block-oriented disk drive. So we do that, and it says my disk has been created. The next step is we have to attach that storage to our LXD VM. And the way we do that is LXD config device add to test VM my disk. The disk pool is default, and the source will be my disk. And now it has been attached to the test VM. Our next step is to start the test VM, and we do that with a LXD start test-VM, and that is followed by a LXD console test-VM --type equals VGA, which brings up a console for our test VM. One way to see what storage is attached to our system is by opening the app drawer and launching the disks application. And here you can see that there is a 54 gigabyte hard disk, which is the primary hard disk where the Ubuntu is installed, and we see our brand new 10 gigabyte hard disk. Now, personal preference for me is I like to go out and install gparted, which is the graphical version of the partition application for GNOME. So that is sudo apt install gparted. You can do the same commands in disks, but I prefer to use gparted because it provides some additional features. And you can launch gparted either from the command line, or you can come up here to the app drawer, and we should be able to see gparted here. We don't right now because those are frequent apps. There we go, gparted, we launch it. It will always ask for our password. And then gparted comes up. So you can see by default it sees SDA1 and SDA2. SDA1 is the EFI partition, SDA2 is the root partition for the Ubuntu. If we come up here and we click on this pull down, you can see that I have an SDB disk, which is our new 10 gigabyte disk. If I click on that, it says it's currently unallocated. If I try to create a new partition, we'll get an error that says that no partition table is found. So what we have to do is go under Device and say Create Partition Table. And you can either create an MS-DOS partition table or you can create another partition table type. So we're going to create an MS-DOS partition table because that is what is typical. And now that we've done that, I'm going to say New Partition. And I'm just going to make it the full size of that current drive. And you can choose your partition type. ext4 is great, so that's what I'm going to choose. So I add that partition. And then I click the check mark to apply those operations, which includes formatting the drive. So now that the drive is formatted, it is available for mounting. Before we can mount a drive, we need to have a mount point. So if I come down here into my terminal and I do a sudo makedir /mnt/mydisk, the mydisk folder will be the mount point to mount our new storage. Since I'm not planning to have separate user directories on this particular device, I'm going to go ahead and change the permissions of that mydisk folder to be accessible to anyone on the system, because after all, this is just LXD VM, probably only with one user. So I do a chmod 777 /mnt/mydisk. Now that we have a mount point and the permissions are set on that mount point, I'm going to do a sudo mount /dev /sdb1 space /mnt/mydisk, and we now have the disk mounted in that mydisk folder. If you go to the gparted menu and refresh your devices, you'll see that /dev /sdb1, the first partition on the SDB device, is mounted, and it's mounted to /mount /mydisk. So let's try to access this disk from the command line by doing a cd /mnt/mydisk. And if we do an ls, you can see that the lost and found is out there, which means that we are mounted, because that's one of the artifacts that you get from an ext4 formatted disk. So let's try to do a touch test.txt. And we have a new file. We do an ls, and there is test.txt. And we can also do a makedir on, let's say, folder 123. And now if we do a ls, we have a 123 folder, we have a test.txt file. Now let's try to access those same files from Nautilus. Let's go up here and click on the Nautilus screen. And you can see that we don't have it listed anywhere in here. So if we say other locations and we look at computer, we look at the mount directory and we look at my disk, there it is. And if we go over here to add to bookmarks, we will now have a my disk there. So if we shut down Nautilus and we bring Nautilus back up, we have a my disk section you can see here. And if I create a new folder called XYZ, there we have the folder. If I come down here to the terminal and do an ls, there's the folder XYZ in addition to what we had before. In order to dismount the disk, we first of all have to move out of the folder because that keeps the disk busy. So I cd to tilde, which brings me back to home, and then I issue the command sudo umount space /dev /sdb1. And I could have also said sudo umount /mnt/mydisk, and that would have worked as well. Suppose we want to mount our new drive when the system boots. In order to do that, we're going to go into gparted here again, right click on it and do information. And you're going to want to copy this UUID, which identifies the drive. Once you have that information copied, you can go up here and do a sudo nano /etc/fs tab, and that will it will edit the file systems table, and then we will put a mount command in here, which basically says UUID equal to the UUID that we copied up here, /MNT/mydisk, which is the mount point that we used previously with the command line mount, and it's an ext4 device. I put an underscore net drive on here because I really believe that the networking stack needs to be up and running before we're able to connect to this. I'm not entirely sure on that, but it certainly doesn't hurt. So now I do a save and an exit, and next a sudo reboot. The system shuts down, it's rebooting. We can connect to the console with LXC console test VM -- type equals VGA. It connects back to the system. System is booting. Now that the system is fully booted, if I go into the Nautilus file manager and I go down to the existing my disk shortcut that we put in before, it still points to the same mount point. So we can see that we have our files here. And of course we can edit files. I can double click test and I can say this is a test, and then go save it out. And there we go. We were able to write to the drive and update a file on the drive. I've featured the LXD dashboard on the channel in the past, and I wanted to enter it to show you what these virtual disks look like. So my host that I'm hosting these particular LXD VM containers on is listed here, and you can see that it has one of 3 virtual machines running. And you can see the virtual machine that is running is the one we've been working with, which is test VM. If I click on test VM and I go over to devices and I go over to disk, you can see that the root disk is loaded, and also my disk is currently loaded here as well, which is the virtual disk we've been using. If I go over to the left margin and go to storage pools, I can see that under storage pools we have the one default storage pool called default, but if we go inside of the default storage pool, you can see the virtual disk, my disk, is listed. So assuming that we want to reverse all this and detach the storage, we want to bring up a terminal first of all, and we want to do a sudo nano /etc/fsdisk, fs tab rather, and we want to go down to the line where we mount our disk and delete it, and then save the file back out. At this point in time, we can shut our virtual machine down with a power off command. And once we come back to the prompt, if we do LXC list, we can see that our test VM is in fact powered down and stopped. To remove the virtual disk from the LXD VM now that it's stopped, we can do a LXC config device remove test VM my disk, and that removes the disk from the test-VM. If we boot the VM back up with a LXC start test-VM, and then we go back into the console, the VM will boot back up. Now that the VM is rebooted, if I click on the app drawer and I type disks, you can see that when I bring up the disks application, the 10 gigabyte disk is no longer present. Back at the LXD host command prompt, we can do a LXC storage list, and you can see that we have the one default storage pool called default. Now, in order to see the volumes that are currently defined on our default storage pool, we can do a LXC volume list default, and you get a long list. Up at the top, you can see we have a custom My Disk, and that is our My Disk. It is still persistent, and the data in it is still available, and it could be attached to another LXD VM. And then, of course, you have the volumes for each of the LXD VMs, and then you have images for other LXD devices or other images and custom images that I may have stored. So let's suppose we're completely done with the custom disk, My Disk, and we want to delete it. The command we use is LXC storage volume delete from the default pool My Disk. And it says My Disk has been deleted. If we go back and do a LXC storage volume list default, you will see that My Disk is now gone. So in summary, we learned that LXD allows for the creation of storage volumes inside storage pools. We created and deleted a storage volume. We attached and also detached a storage volume from a LXD virtual machine. And we created a partition table on the new volume and formatted a partition. We learned how to mount and dismount the volume from the command line. And we also learned how to mount the volume at boot time. Here we are at the command prompt for my LXD host, and if I do a LXC list, you can see that I have 3 LXD virtual machines and a cat jumping behind me again. Sadie! Anyway, that's it for today. Please subscribe and like to the channel and hit that notification bell, and we'll see you next time.